Hi, everyone. Cecilia here from ISSIP. So we have David Ng joining us from Toronto today. Hi, David. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi.
Could you introduce yourself to the ISSIP community?
So I think I'll go backwards. Is that I was 28 years with IBM, and I was with the service science movement when Jim first started it. And actually, one of the early meetings that Jim came to on the recommendation of Doug McDavid, who was also at IBM that time, was to attend the 2003 International Society for the System Sciences meeting. System sciences goes across all types of systems, biological systems, social systems, ecosystems. And so service systems has actually been a focus. Through the systems community, we also ended up with a subgroup focused on service system science, of which Jim Kojima and Hiroshi Deguchi in Tokyo were leading for 10 years. So we've had that long arc with the systems community. I've since moved on from IBM, and I'm still hanging around academic circles, and we're running a system changes learning circle and a system thinking community in the Toronto area.
Amazing. I would love to learn more about systems changes learning circle, which you've just mentioned. You say that it's 10 years running, and then now we're 4 years in. Could you tell us a little more about what that is?
Yeah. So the way I got into systems actually had an assignment to IBM Palisades, which was a teaching facility, executive business institute. When I joined, Steve Heckel was writing this book called Adaptive Enterprise. And he kept saying all these outrageous things like, well, the customer is the primary constituent for the enterprise and these sorts of things. And it's like, well, given I spent a lot of time in business schools, this isn't exactly what they teach. So, why do you say these things, Steve? And he says, you need to go read some Russell Ackoff. And so I went to a couple of conferences with Russell Ackoff. In the end, Steve said, I told you to read Russell Ackoff, not become Russell Ackoff, because what was happening was that in order to get through Steve's material, it was like, okay, Steve, you're saying this, and Russell Ackoff says that, and then he would end up arguing with me for an hour about it. So that's the way he actually ended up writing the book. In the systems thinking community, there's a lot of different branches. There's a cybernetics community, there's a general systems theory community that I'm closely aligned with. There's a learning systems community. And so there's been this question when people talk about systems and you talk about service systems, what do you mean by that? And we try to look at it more deeply.
Yeah, so to me, as a designer, if someone talks about systems, then immediately the one thing that comes to my mind is a service system at the micro, meso, and macro level. But then if I talk to my colleagues in academia, design researchers who are doing a lot of research in cybernetics, then they do talk about something else, even though eventually we're talking about the system, the same thing. Like you mentioned about the different branches, right? Like as a service system, the system thinker, thought leader in this field, how do you see that this field is evolving, has evolved so far, and then is evolving towards the future?
There's actually there's a series on service system science that's been published on Springer, and Jim Kojima was leading that up. A lot of it has been on it's kind of like the same sort of thing that's happened within COSI and the systems engineering community, which was when you focus on a system, sometimes it's too narrow and you need to broaden out more. And so a lot of the service system science work has been about understanding the human systems and how they interact within the service system. The system is, of course, more than technology. So I think that people within this community actually appreciate that human beings are part of the service system. But then you have service, you have living systems and non-living systems, and you have parts and how they work together. So traditionally, the way that systems have worked and the way that they've been teaching it is that you end up thinking about, oh, what is a system and what is its boundary?
Exactly.
But Actually, in practice, having worked through that a lot, and I joke that until about 4 or 5 years ago, I used to teach Russ Akoff and teach all the traditional West Churchmen, all these sorts of approaches. Um, the thing that we found interesting was a shift toward systems change.
Mhm.
And so it's like, okay, well, what do you mean by system change? Given that I'm a systems thinker or just in the system sciences, what do you mean by systems change, and how does it differ from change? And if that's the case, then if you had a service system change, what would that mean as opposed to just a service change,
Yeah.
right? And when we started the system changes learning circle in 2009, sorry, 2019, the focus was actually to what the it was actually learning from Jim Sporer saying, I'm going to do this for 10 years. I'm going to try to get it right. And for him, that started in 2003,
Mhm.
2004. And so it's like, okay, so we don't know what system change is all about, so we're going to do some research on it.
Mhm.
And we actually this year have been doing a lot of workshops, and so one, people don't really understand what they're talking about when they say systems change. But the emphasis is actually on change more than it's on systems. And so what we've done then is come at it from the point of view of, okay, let's understand change a little better.
Mhm.
And the traditional work that we see in organizational change coming down through Kurt Lewin, as we
Mhm.
most pronounce it, is usually unfreeze, move, refreeze, which
Mhm.
is like, okay, that's a single systems change,
Mhm.
but it's not a multiple that doesn't actually have you change multiple times.
Right.
And so one of the indicators we had was when we were starting up the project, it's like, oh, I always like to register domain names. And no one had ever registered systemchanges.com because it's like they think a system only changes once.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the kickoffs of what we've done. So now when we actually work on workshops, the way we think about the way we approach it is about thinking in time rather than thinking about a system and its boundary. Now you could say, well, you could think about a system with a boundary in time,
Mhm.
but that's not the way that most people think. So if you're looking at a service systems change, then I would go, okay, so you have the service system that's proceeding and say it's operating normally, and then you get a rhythmic shift of some sort. So as an example, the pandemic.
Mhm.
Okay, so are you supposed to approach the pandemic with a unfreeze, move, refreeze approach? Like, does that
Perhaps.
even work?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, no, you've got all these other threads of things that are woven together, and you have to undo this and
Right.
accelerate that and slow this down. So
Mhm.
it's a different way of looking at it.
That's very interesting too, because I also read quite a bit about papers around system sustainability, like how we can ensure the health and sustainability of the system, service system in general. From your point of view, what are the important factors to ensure the sustainability of the system as you move forward, especially in Industry 4.0? There are a lot of mismatch of between, non-human to human, but also between non-human to human as well, right? So what are the key factors that we can bring into in this scene to make sure that the service system that we're designing is sustainable?
One of the key ideas I picked up from Tim Ingold, who is in professor of ecological anthropology, is the idea of alongside. Is
Mm.
people tend to think about systems as inside and outside, but what you should think about is like you're on a river and you're all boats floating downstream and you interact with each other.
Mhm.
And so the way that Tim Ingold has been approaching sustainability, there's an interesting story he tells, which is based off a chapter that was written by John Knight on the second life of trees.
Mhm.
And it was written about upland foresters in Japan, and the tradition they had was that, in effect, a forester would look after a tree for 30 years, and then they would get permission, and they would, in effect, perform the rituals to actually cut down the tree, and then the tree would become part of a house, And that way the tree looks after you for 30 years. So firstly, the forester looks after the tree for 30 years, and then the tree looks after the forester for 30 years. So that's a different idea of sustainability, and that gets interrupted if you don't have that cycle where the trees and the people are alongside each other.
Mhm.
Because the what's happened is that the families are not so traditional now, so they're starting to build out of concrete. The trees are not being used.
Mhm.
And so now you've got old trees, and so a sustainability person, a conservationist that comes in actually as a preservationist and says, "Oh, we should leave those old trees." And you go, "No, no, no. That is not living alongside. The trees
Mhm.
have now gotten really old, and
Mhm.
they're so old that they're in effect dead on their legs, as they say."
Mhm.
Thinking alongside takes a little bit of thinking. If you're thinking about sustainability of a service system, you need to think about the sustainability of the ecology around that, which
Mhm.
would be, okay, so if you have business partners that are providing with it, you can't just be concerned about yourself. You have to be concerned about the customers you have, whether they are sustainable as well, and then you work through time together.
That completely makes sense. Very interesting. Other than system changes, Learning Circle, are you working on any other interesting projects you would like to share with the ISSIP community?
Mostly everything is systems changes now. There's a lot of subgroups that are working within that. We have an aesthetic subgroup that's trying to figure out what that's about. We have uh, a regenerative ecologies subgroup. So what's happened is that at year 4, we more or less have the scientific foundations on doing system changes, and that's the so-called rhythmic shifts bent,
Yeah.
rhythmic shift bent. But the everything is not scientific. And so as we're looking, it's kind of like we need to consider other ways of approaching. And so the system aesthetics group is one as an example. So, from a scientific perspective, we aren't actually looking into that so much. And so we have multiple paradigms, multiple philosophies that we're working on.
That's a fascinating system aesthetics. Yeah, that's amazing to hear that, especially also whenever we talk about systems of thinking, we often like laser focus on scientific side of it, right? Like technical side of it, rather than soft elements, the human side of it. So
Right.
it's great to know that too. Before we close the call, is there anything else you would like to share with the ISAP community? Any suggestions or any collaboration call for papers, collaborations?
So we have a community in Toronto called System Thinking Ontario. It used to be that we would meet at OCAD University in a circle, but with the pandemic, we went online. We hold the meetings every month. And so people, while they're online, are welcome to join us at any time, usually the second Monday of the month. As a matter of fact, this for people who are interested in leverage points, this month we have a speaker talking about leverage points.
That's amazing. I would love to join that too. What time is it?
It's the second Monday of the month, at 6:30 p.m. Eastern.
Oh, okay. The timeline is always a challenging.
Yes,
A lot of
yeah,
interesting things are happening there, in Silicon Valley as well as in Toronto. But like time wise, it's always challenging for me to join. But
yeah. So we have others. So firstly, we always everything we do is Creative Commons and open source, and so there's an entire video library of all those proceedings. If people are really interested, we're actually looking to expand the System Changes Learning Circle, and we have people actually Switzerland, Italy,
oh
and
wow.
we have more friendly hours for them. But then again, it's one of those things where you have to remember that people are on a 10-year journey, and we're in year 4. So it's not a quick in and out sort of thing. It's like it's a learning circle. We're unfunded. We do this on our own time.
Okay.
People are welcome to join us, but there's a little speed bump, which is, oh, just you're not going to get answers overnight.
I see. I see. Oh, I totally get that. Okay, awesome. Thanks for joining us, David, today and sharing your thoughts and experiences in service system and systems thinking in general. Thanks everyone for tuning in today. Thank you.